Hey everybody, I'm going to do a couple of quick demos that I hope will help you in terms of working with doing the assessment. Um, so here's an example of, I want to just do a little work here with strings. One of the things that we know that we could do if we have a string, let's just run this so this is cleared out. Let's get rid of this HTML. So I'm just going to do this in JSBin for a minute. But let's say, first of all, that we wanted to loop over a string. So fairly easy for us to loop over a string, right? We could start at 0. We could say hello.length, I++, put our brackets here, console.log, hello, I. Right? And if we go to run that, we could see all the letters in this string that we have. So probably a better name for this would be message, and we'll change this to message, and we'll change this. So one of the things that you see here, which is actually important, is that a string, in some ways behaves sort of similar to an array. It's not an array, but it can be iterated over. So meaning that you can sort of access each character in a string by using an index the same way you would end up getting each element in an array using an index. So this is fine, this works, but let's say we wanted to do something a little bit more interesting here. Let's get rid of this. Let's say we want to have some method that would, let's say, remove spaces, and we'll pass in message. Okay. Now, again, if this was sort of if you were doing your test first, this would probably be some method that you would have to go and implement. And obviously, if we went to run this, right, we'd find that remove spaces doesn't work. So one thing that we're sort of looking at here is that if we're going to be console logging something out and see what our expectations are, and we can actually even say, we expect that we're going to have hello world with 2 exclamation points, right? Which obviously we don't have. So let's go up here and we'll put in our function. Our function is going to be remove spaces, and we're going to pass in a message. Again, this is just going to be a local value here, and we can return our message. So now if we go and do this, and again, don't be confused. Here's a variable outside the function. I'm passing this variable into the function. If I go and run this, right, I get this, but I still have all my spaces here. So the question is, how could you end up getting rid of your spaces? Well, there's a couple of things you could do. A string has a replace method, and we could actually replace the spaces with an empty space. And if we run this, we'll see that we sort of have things working, but the replace method only ends up working with the first space that it finds. This is one way to do it. A fairly other simplistic way to do this, which would be totally rational to do, and it would work, and it would get your test to pass, would be to do something like this. Result is equal to an empty string. And simply loop over our string. So say I equals 0, I less than message.length, I++. And we could go over here, and we could say, and again, it's perfectly legitimate to break this down into smaller chunks if you want to, right? We could say letter equals message I, right? And sometimes you sort of want to see if you're going in the right direction here. So sometimes you'll even do console.log letter, just to see if you're looping over things properly, which in fact it looks like we are. So now we can just put a condition here and say, look, if letter is not equal to a space, then we're going to say result plus equals letter. Okay? And we will return our result. So let's run this. And we see that we have hello world without the spaces. So this is one way you could do it, perfectly legitimate way to do it. Another thing you could also do is, I went and commented this out. I mean, if you're really sort of dead set on using the string replace method, you could use the string replace method with the regular expression. Again, this is not something that you really have to worry about too much, but we could actually say message replace. Again, if we just replace a single character here, we'll see that this will only replace that first space. But if we actually turn this into a regular expression, you can create sort of a literal regular expression with these slashes. And we could specify, hey, look, we want to, if we just did this again, so our regular expression is just basically saying, here's a regular expression with a space. We get the same result. But if we say we want to globally replace that G as an identifier on the regular expression, again, this is just for your knowledge. This is not really that important for the assessment. But if we run that, this should give us the result. But it's just sort of one way to show it to you. I'm going to comment this out, and this would sort of be my preferred way of doing it. So again, what I'm sort of trying to get across here is, again, whenever you sort of have a test that you can implement, look and see what the expectations are, right? If the expectations are that remove spaces message is going to end up giving you a result, then you know you're going to have to return something. You know you're going to have to pass something in here. Again, we could name this variable whatever we want to name it when we pass it in. It just becomes a local variable. But again, the sort of big takeaway here is that you have the ability to loop over a string. Let's actually just look at one other thing here. And just for the sake of argument, what I'm going to do here is, after I end up creating my message, I'll say message.reverse. And that doesn't help me because that's not a method. That's going to be a method of an array. But you might take some, give some thoughts to how you can reverse a string, how you might go about doing that. And one thing we could sort of think about doing it, so we have our remove spaces method. Let's actually do console.log, and we'll say reverse message, and we're going to pass in a message. So what we expect to get back is that message in sort of the backwards order, right? So we could run this. We see reverse message is not a method, but the thing that I want you to see here is that you have the ability to loop going forward, and you have the ability to also loop going back. So if I say reverse message, again, I put my method in here. My method is going to take a parameter. I'm going to just call this M. I could call it whatever I want to call it. Okay? And what I'll do here is I'm going to do a very similar thing to what I did below, where I'm going to say result is equal to an empty string. There's other ways you could get to the same result, which might be even a little bit more elegant, but this is perfectly adequate to say what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop, and I'm going to start at m.length -1. So that's going to be the highest index in my string, right? The length of my string -1. And I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm going to loop through this as long as I is greater than equal to 0. And I'm going to have to reduce I. So instead of doing I++, I'm going to do I minus. So again, this is the same way that you can loop over a string going forward, or loop over an array going from the front to the back. You could always go in the reverse direction as well. And so now what I'm doing is I basically am looping over the indexes for the string. The same way over here, I was looping over going forwards. Here, I'm going to be looping over going backwards. And again, just to see if you're at the right spot, do console.log I, and you should see the numbers going down here. Right, so this is telling me I've got a string. It's actually going to be should be 14 characters, right? Again, 0 index to 13. And all I'm going to do here is take my result plus equals, and I'm going to say M, I. this should give me my string in reverse. And the reason why it doesn't, and the reason why I get a define, this is very important, is that you have to make sure you return your result. And so here I just reversed the order of this string. So that's just a couple of things that I think are, might sort of help you out in terms of, doing some string manipulation.